Discovery class, good morning. Did you ever notice when you read a book, the last part of the book is often the best part of the whole writing? Well, that's true of the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is the story of Israel entering Canaan and taking the land. They defeated their enemy, they eliminated all other authority, and each of the 12 tribes was given land. Each tribe was appointed a distinct territory. That's what this chapter is all about. Everybody got an inheritance. The old, the young, the feeble, and the fit. Joshua assigned the territory. He was the guy that divvied it out. Each tribe was called forward, and they stood before him, and there was Reuben, there was Gad, there was Manasseh. Now, not all the land was given out to these people in the same proportion. Judah, his parcel was quite large, and it was in the center of Israel, up on the hill country, the high country. Dan's section was not as big as his, but it was on the coast. The tribe of Levi, they didn't get any land. They were the clergy. They were the leaders in worship, and they taught the Torah, the law. Manasseh occupied the valley. Gad, he took the land on the east side of the Jordan. Chapter 14 of Joshua is the story of God's Hall of Famer, I call him. He's about to be inducted for his life's work. He's 85 years old. He should be really heading to the nursing home. No. His name is Caleb. Gray-headed. He stands before Joshua, and he delivers the following speech. Here's what he says. Joshua, you know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me, way back there in Kadesh Barnea. Do you remember I was only 40 years old then? Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me with you from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Remember that? And I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. I told him the truth. Now you remember the story. Moses and the children of Israel, they were camped at Kadesh Barnea, a little settlement just east of the Jordan River overlooking the Promised Land. He selected 12 spies. Joshua and Caleb, they were part of the 12. Well, in they went. What they found? Well, what they found was unbelievable. Vineyards, fruit trees, livestock, modern cities, massive roads and highways, schools, downtowns, palm trees, lakes and rivers, shade trees, fresh well water, playground, towers. They even had street lights lit up with oil lamps. But the country was occupied. And it was occupied by giants. They had instruments of war, they were men of war, and they were mighty fighting men. It made the hearts of these spies melt with fear, the book says. When they finally snuck back to Moses, the 12 spies gave two conflicting reports of what they had spotted in the land. They all agreed that the people were giants, the cities, they were modern and beautiful. None of them questioned that. They didn't question the value of what was in there. The value of the land, they could see it. It flowed with milk and honey. Here's the conflict. 10 spies, they all spoke together and they said, we can't go in there. Those cities are too large. They're too fortified. And us up against them, we'd only be grasshoppers. We can't take the place. If you think we can, we're going to all die. That was their report. Joshua and Caleb, Their report was different. Here's what they said. Yes, we can. I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses agreed. Surely the land where your feet's going to trod, it's going to be as an inheritance for your children and your children's children, because you wholly followed the Lord your God. That was their report. Now move the clock ahead. Move it ahead 45 years. Caleb is 85 years old. He's in this last chapter here, the book of Joshua. Listen to what he's saying. They're now in the land. The land is conquered. Jericho fell. Ai fell. All the kings fell. Here speaks Caleb. Behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses in the wilderness. And then that's verse 10. Following chapter 14, if you read from verse 6 all the way through to verse 12, and you read it carefully, you're going to find something very striking in Caleb's speech when he receives his Hall of Fame jacket. Here's what is striking. 9 times. Get that. 9 times. This word is repeated. The Lord. The Lord. The Lord. 9 times. What filled Caleb's mind and heart? Why was he different from the 10 spies? Well, he knew that when he went in there, he wasn't going in alone. God was going with him. And because the Lord was on his side, he made a different report than the other 10. Now, I want you to apply that to you and me. Like Caleb, we face enemies, and we face them every day. I want you to listen to what I'm going to tell you about my friend Stuart. Stuart was my neighbor for 20 years out at the coast when I lived on a little house on an island. Stuart was the oldest of 4 boys. He grew up in Winnipeg, and it was there he went to high school. He was in his senior year, but he had a chemistry teacher, sort of like the children of Israel fighting the battle against these Canaanites. He was a bit of a Canaanite because that chemistry teacher, Stuart couldn't stand. As a result, he flunked the course. But it just so happened that the chemistry teacher was also the guidance counselor in his grade 12 year. And once during that grade 12 semester, each student had to have a session or an interview with a guidance counselor. It so happened that Stuart's appointment was with this chemistry teacher who also doubled as a guidance counselor. It was almost like a trap. He detested this man, and he knew that this man had it in for him. And he was going to let it all out during this interview in this little conflab with his guidance counselor. He started off by saying, "You know, Stuart, you're a failure. You're just a bit of a lazy bum. And because of that, you're in the wrong program. You should be in general studies, not heading towards university. You should be in tech. You should be becoming a welder, maybe a plumber or a carpenter." Stuart said, "My dad's a carpenter. I'm all thumbs when I work with my dad. He won't let me use a power tool because he's afraid I'm going to cut my fingers off." "Well, you're never going to make it. As a student, Stuart left that interview and he flunked grade 12. Got a job at Sears that summer, and he was selling shoes. September rolled around. He was still there selling shoes. His dad, the carpenter, he went to the store, into the shoe department, and he said to Stuart, Stuart, I want you to go back to high school, and I want you to finish grade 12. Stuart said, I'm not going back, Dad. If I go back, I have to face that jerk, and I'm not going to that chemistry class or die. His dad said to him, your whole future's in front of you, son. You're so much brighter than me. I'm a carpenter. You're better than a carpenter. Nothing wrong with us carpenters, but I think you've got something ahead of you that you're destined for, and I don't want you to ever miss it. I want you to go on and finish your grade 12, and then we'll have this talk again, but I want you a graduate. Don't spoil your whole future because of the chemistry teacher. He did. His dad told him, I'll go back with you. So the next day he went with him and enrolled into his grade 12 there in Winnipeg. When he graduated, he put on his cap and gown, and then he put it on his dad. He said, Dad, you graduated with me. Thanks for putting me back on track. He went on to university. He became a lawyer. He became a QC, that's Queen's Counselor. Then he was so good at law, he went on and got his PhD. Became the Minister of Health for one of our large provinces in Canada. Last year, he was invited back with all his colleagues to a bit of a reunion at the high school back in Winnipeg. And he went. And at that reunion, who do you think was there? That's right, his chemistry teacher. And his chemistry teacher came up to him and said, I know you. I know you. How do I know you? Stuart looked at him and he said, you never knew me. He said, you were like a spy on the staff at the high school, and you had it in for me. And I was the one that you said I would be a total failure. And I'm here to tell you the real one in this story is my dad. My dad rescued me when you had almost destroyed me. And I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. You know me, but only on my face. You don't know who I am as a person. Joshua said to Caleb, I know you. I know you. Promised Land people always face giants. Grade 12 students face giants. Young married couples face giants. All of you on your job, you face giants. Giants make your heart melt within you, right? You become grasshoppers, never graduate, never a conqueror. No Hall of Famer, no promised land. Your destiny, wilderness. You aren't coming in here. 9 times in this passage of Joshua 14, Caleb repeated his victory note. I shall drive them out, as the Lord said. Now we come to this 12th verse of chapter 14 of Joshua. Caleb is speaking to Joshua. The whole assembly is listening. He has an audience with all his friends. He says, give me this hill, says Caleb. I want the hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You heard those words yourself. I want the hill. Caleb, he could have cursed his God when he gave Moses the good report over that horrible report of the 12 spies. He didn't expect 45 more years in the wilderness. For the next 4 decades, entering into the promised land, It was all put on hold. And after that length of time, well, I'm heading to the nursing home. Most of them would have given up. They forgot about it. Not Caleb. He didn't bellyache. He didn't complain. He didn't grow sour. When the time came for him to receive his Hall of Fame jacket, he stepped right up and stood forward. He said to Joshua, I'm ready. He didn't have one giant in his head. There were no giants in his land. He told the Lord was with me. To Caleb, his thoughts were probably Psalm 83:18. He is the most high over all the earth. I know who's on my side. Caleb could have just as nicely quoted Psalm 89, verse 6. Who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? And who among the sons of the mighty is like the Lord? He's on my side. Class, before I let you go, let me tell you in closing the place where Caleb really wanted to settle. It was Hebron. It had a very special place in his heart, and it did for all the Hebrews. It had previously been owned by Abraham. It's the only land on earth that he owned, Hebron. He's buried there. So is his wife. Following his burial, Isaac is buried there, Rebekah, as well as Jacob. They're all buried at Hebron. Caleb, knowing the history of Hebron and what the ancestors did who were there buried, he asked Moses if he could have that as his inheritance. He wanted his tomb to be among the Jewish holiest families. Moses received the request and he told Caleb, if you want it, go ahead. It's yours. So 45 years later, at the age of 85, he took Hebron as his new home. Verse 12 says, give me the mountain of which the Lord has spoken to me on that day. Have you set your sights on a mountain? Maybe you're as old as Caleb. He chased out the enemy. He reclaimed the city. Caleb had a faith that he wanted to preserve. He had a new mission in life that he was looking forward to. Why don't you ask God for your Hebron to claim for your glory? Has nothing to do with age. No giant's going to stop you or stand in your way. You won't be disqualified because of your talent, and you'll never be defeated. Clarence Jordan. He was raised in the southwest of Georgia in the States. He was born July the 29th, 1912. He grew up a farmer. And he went to the University of Georgia and he got a degree in agriculture. But he also wanted to be a preacher. After he got his degree in agriculture, he went off to seminary and he became a Greek scholar. He spent his whole life serving poor, especially blacks in the community. Many of the blacks came from big families. Well, so did he. He was the seventh child of a family of 10 kids. From an early age, young Jordan was troubled by racial and economic injustice. His education set him up to be a real Caleb in his community. In 1933, that's when he got his degree in agriculture. But he had a deep conviction that the roots of poverty were spiritual. They weren't just economic. Hence, he went on to get his PhD at seminary. And he became an ordained minister. With those two disciplines, farming and theology trained, he bought 440 acres to create an interracial Christian farming community. Well, what's that? Well, it became his Hebron. He called it koinonia. He built houses for the poor, and he severed off land on which it was built. They could live side by side. People in the village, they grew to love him. But the civil rights movement was just on the fold. It was just beginning. On the march, some white citizens in the area, they increasingly perceived that the koinonia was a threat. And they got targeted. Clarence Jordan experienced economic boycotting, repeated violence, including several bombings. But he stayed the course, and he drove the giants out. He formed a church right there on that little plot of land of 440 acres. Most of those that attended the church were blacks. Remember, this is a man that had a PhD in Greek, but he could speak the language of the poor. When he would preach from the pulpit, they didn't understand his Bible. So he wrote a Bible that they would understand. Do you know what he called it? The Cotton Patch Gospel. What he did, he took the King James Version and he put it down into the language of the people that they would understand. Do you remember that part when Jesus said, if you are going to follow me, you must take up your cross daily and follow me? Well, that didn't mean anything to the blacks listening to him. So do you know what he did? He took that text and he put it into their language. They didn't know what a cross was, but they did know lynching. Many of the blacks were arrested for no reason, and they were hung from a tree. So he took that passage of scripture and he said, if you follow Christ, you could get lynched. So pick up your rope and follow me. Every black in that congregation understood what Clarence Jordan was saying. Now, remember, integration was just opening up in public schools. Whites and blacks were finally enrolled. They can go to school together. But only the white children were bused. Black children were not. When it rained, the black children didn't go to school. They couldn't get a ride. Only the whites went. Clarence Jordan, seeing this, he bought an old van, and on rainy days, he would bus the black children himself to school. Well, that annoyed the office of the education minister so much. He didn't want blacks in his white school. The superintendent of education, hearing what Clarence Jordan was doing, with his pickup, with his van, he went to Clarence Jordan's father. He went behind his back, and he went to Clarence Jordan's father, who is an old man now. He's a widower. The superintendent, he goes to him, and he says, Mr. Jordan, do you know what your son's doing? No. We told him what he was doing, taking his van and driving these kids on a rainy day to school. They aren't welcome there, Mr. Clarence Jordan. They aren't welcome there. We don't want the blacks in our school. When Clarence got a visit from his father and was told this story, he went immediately to the Department of Education, and he was boiling mad. When he drove to the office of the school, or rather the education department, he didn't get an appointment. He didn't ask his secretary. He walked right past the secretary. He walked straight into the office of the superintendent of education, walked right up to the man, took him by the tie, and he threatened him with these words, if you ever go to my dad again and tell him what you said, that I have to stop taking black children to school on rainy days, I'm going to forget Jesus for 15 minutes, and I'm going to pound your lights out. How's that for a modern day Hall of Famer? I call him Caleb Jordan. Talk about claiming a Hebron and driving out the enemy. Do you know what happened to the Koinonia community that Clarence Jordan used way back there in Georgia? From that little community, was born the Habitat for Humanity. Society, now serving all over the world, has a group of people building houses for the poor. And it's all because of that preacher, farmer, who decided that he could come and do it for them. Even President Jimmy Carter has served as a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. Isn't that a great ending to a story of a book called Joshua? Wouldn't you like to be a Caleb? Well, you can be. You can go and claim your Hebron. You can knock out your enemy. No, I can't. Sure you can. Do you remember what Caleb did? He said, I didn't do it. I did it because the Lord was on my side. There aren't any failures when the Lord's on your side. You know that. Well, that's enough for today. I'm so glad you came by. Will you come back next week? Well, I'll be looking for you.